Welcome. NOAA has just released its November 2020 Global Climate Report, and this video is a summary of that report. Here's a quick summary of the main events from November. It turned out to be the second hottest November on record. We have La Nina conditions present, and that is liable to last through to the spring of 2021. Arctic sea ice still in a rapid decline. Antarctic sea ice is now slightly above normal. Now let's take a look at general conditions. Globally, as I said, November was the second warmest on record, with an increase of 0.97 degrees centigrade over the 20th century average. That is 0.05 degrees centigrade above what it was last year. Land by itself was the warmest recorded at plus 1.77 degrees centigrade. That's 0.48 degrees centigrade warmer than it was last year. The ocean was its fourth warmest at 0.67 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average, and that's a drop of 0.11 degrees centigrade since last year, and it's probably due to the La Nina that we have going. The northern hemisphere was the first warmest with an excess of 1.34 degrees centigrade over 20th century average. That's an increase of 0.25 degrees centigrade over last year. The southern hemisphere was the ninth warmest, being 0.57 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average, which is a drop of 0.17 degrees centigrade since last year, and again probably due to La Nina. That makes it 431 consecutive months with temperatures above the 20th century average, and the 44th consecutive November with the temperature above the 20th century average. Next, let's take a look at how those temperatures are distributed across the globe. Now, this is a map showing the departure from the long-term average. Now, note here the long-term average is from 1981 to 2010, which in and of itself had a great deal of global warming included in it. Blue here marks colder than average, red here marks warmer than average, and the deeper the shade, the further that departure is. You can see that the United States, Europe, Siberia, China, to an extent Africa and South America are all showing a great deal of warming. But Canada, Central Asia are both relatively cool spots. But the real feature here that we're looking at is this cold water off the western coast of South America. That is your La Nina. There's also, note, a great deal of cold water off of Antarctica, all the way around the planet basically. The last map didn't really show us whether any of those temperatures recorded were records. This one does. Note that the baseline for this is different. It's from 1880 to 2020, so that's 141 years. So this is comparing the temperatures we're seeing now with records over the last 141 years. Now you can see that none of these are record temperatures. There are some areas that are low. We only have two much cooler than average, and that's part of the La Nina area. Whereas we have hundreds that are much warmer than average, and nearly 100 pixels here that are record warmest. Those would particularly include Central South America, Siberia, Scandinavia, interior of Australia, some parts of Africa, and Northern Europe. So I asked the question, where is this much trumpeted global cooling gone? We've been having people tell us for the last few years that we're going into a period of global cooling, yet we keep on setting higher and higher temperatures, and we don't see any of these record cooling areas anywhere. Here is a display showing the ranking of each of the months for the last 6 years, and November of 2020 is there in second place. Overall, it looks as though 2020 is going to be the second warmest year on record, second only to 2016. But we can take a look at that graphically if you wish. Now let's see how 2020 is shaping up with respect to the previous years. This is the average temperature from January to November for each of the last 141 years. And you can see that the most recent point, 2020, is firmly in second place. With a blistering hot December, it could actually take first place, but I doubt that that's going to happen. But it's very, very unlikely that it's going to be so cold in December that this average will drop down to even third place. So I think we're pretty assured that 2020 is going to be the second warmest year on record. There's an outside chance it will be the warmest year on record. We'll wait until January to find out. Now let's take a look at the upper atmosphere. We'll start with what's called the lower troposphere, which has an altitude of about 4 kilometers. This is using the satellite data, and I'm taking the results from just two of the organizations that look at this. That's the University of Alabama Huntsville and the Remote Sensing Systems. According to UAH, it was the second warmest November, with an excess of 0.53 degrees centigrade above the average. RSS put it as the warmest at 0.68 degrees centigrade above average. Both of them have a fairly high trend of 0.3 degrees centigrade per decade. That's actually higher than the surface temperatures. The mid-troposphere, which is about 7 kilometers in altitude, both had rated it third warmest with an overall trend of 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade. Now I'm going to take a look at the stratosphere, which is an altitude of about 17 kilometers. It's the odd man out in that it's cooling. UAH had it at the 6th coolest, and RSS had it at the 5th coolest, and the overall trend was minus 0.5 degrees centigrade per decade. So that's cooling quite rapidly. Here is the data for the temperature anomaly for the lower troposphere from the satellite data. This is data by Roy Spencer, and he was a long-term skeptic about global warming, yet you can see here that his own data shows a very strong warming trend. The Arctic sea ice was at its second lowest extent on record, and this represents 21 consecutive years with below average Arctic ice. In November, the Antarctic sea ice was well above average for the first time in 5 years. This is probably due to the La Nina that's forming in all that cold water off the northern coast of Antarctica. Once again, we've set a new record high for carbon dioxide levels in November at 412.89 parts per million. Last year that was 410.25, an increase of 2.64 parts per million in the last year. As I've been stressing throughout this, we are in a La Nina situation, and that's likely to stay through at least April or May. The models seem to be in fairly good agreement. There are a few outliers, but it really says that we're here until the summer before we get into ENSO neutral conditions, and at least for the foreseeable future we aren't going to go into El Nino conditions. So in summary then, this was the second warmest November on record, and that is during a strong La Nina when we would expect the whole climate to be cooling quite considerably, but it hasn't. Arctic sea ice continues its decline. However, the Antarctic sea ice is going in the opposite direction for the first time for many years. So that's all the news that's fit to print for this month. I urge you to stay well, and until next time, goodbye.